With anxiety, the adversary comes from within. The fight is with yourself. But with the right solutions, you can find your way back to the center of calmness. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Center of Calmness. Tonight, we're blessed to have Anna Cannon with us. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I know you're calling in from the Chicagoland area, correct?
Yep. About 20 minutes outside of Chicago.
20 minutes outside. That's very cool. I'm personally a big fan of Chicago, though I'm currently in Houston, so I do look forward to getting back there at some point very soon. How are things in Chicago? I understand that things were a little bit tense in the city maybe a month or two ago, but how are they now?
I think it's been a lot better. I think that a few weeks ago we had another kind of like flare up of what was going on, but I think that for the most part it's settled down a little bit at least. I mean, we don't feel it because we're in the suburbs, but I hear a lot from like other people that there's a lot of like closures and things like that in the city. But luckily we're not really feeling those effects because of where we're like located, like 20 minutes outside, so we don't really feel a lot of it. So
oh wow, that's super great. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that the city itself is perhaps still in a bit of turmoil and in a bit of a need of calmness, I suppose, right? But good to hear that at least the suburban life is somewhat normalized. Are there still any major impacts in the suburbs from the COVID from the pandemic?
I haven't heard anything recently. I think for the most part, it's been pretty good. I haven't personally heard anything about it like recently, which is always a good sign. So
that's super great to hear. So perhaps that's a sign of life that maybe we're headed back to normal at some point.
I hope so. I really do hope so. So one can only hope.
That's very cool. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, and I'm particularly excited that we're going to talk about anxiety. Which is such a critical issue these days, especially in a global pandemic, especially with all the economic disruptions and all the other challenges we have to the reality that we used to know. So I think this will be super helpful for our audience. And you mentioned that your journey with anxiety through anxiety started perhaps at an early age and really came to a head in the mid late 2000s. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've always been more of an anxious type of person. Like I had a very anxious personality growing up. And I think that for me, what made it kind of flare and get out of control was in my early 20s, like when I was like 22, 23, I think that's when it like reached its peak. And that's when I started to have like a panic disorder. It turned into a panic disorder. And at the time I was just, I was going to school full time. I was working full time. My parents had both lost their jobs because of the recession. I was living at home. And so a lot of that pressure and that burden was on me to try to help them. I'm an only child. So, I had to like do everything as far as like trying to get them to get another job and trying to help them with like financially. And it was a lot to take on at the time, while going to school. So I think that's what kind of sparked it for me. And then the fear of the actual anxiety is what really made it spiral out of control.
And that's what's amazing about anxiety in general, right? Is that unlike other issues, perhaps, it has its own amplifying factor, right? So it's not so much the trigger that is solely responsible for the anxiety, but once you have the anxiety, it's a phenomenon, at least in my own experience, it's a phenomenon unto itself, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And if you're not careful, it can definitely lead to a more like I call it the advanced version of anxiety, which is more of a panic disorder. And, if you're not careful, it could easily spiral to that. And then getting out of that is its own journey in and of itself. So.
Journey that I'm completely familiar with, and yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I believe I probably had the advanced version for many years actually. So finally, I reached a point in my own life where I had to take control of it and progressively eliminate it. And thankfully, I was able to do that. But once you reach that point, how did you identify first that it was something that needed resolution, and kind of what was the next step after that?
Yeah, I think for me, it was starting to affect my day-to-day life. I would drive to school and I was starting to have panic attacks as I was driving. And so every single day I would have a panic attack on my way to school. And so I would have to pull the car over. I'd have to like catch my breath. And, it just became burdensome. I would have to leave the house 20 minutes earlier just so that I could give myself that time because I knew that it was going to happen and I knew that I was going to have to pull the car over. And, truthfully speaking, that was like my breaking point, because it was like I couldn't do that any longer. And I said, I have to do something about this. I have to either, find out what it is that's causing this, or, take some steps so that I don't feel like this anymore, because it was affecting every area of my life. I couldn't even focus in school at one point too. So I think for me,
Absolutely.
that was a turning point.
Like you said, the advanced version, right? And then there's actually a fear of the anxiety, and that's certainly my personal experience as well. That once you know it's going to happen, then it's the anticipation of that panic attack occurring and approaching that same situation again that actually creates an increase, and of course then it increases the magnitude of the panic attack itself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Because you don't really understand what's happening inside your body. You don't understand the feelings that you're having. You don't understand the thoughts. And you start to think, okay, is something wrong with me? Like, am I having a heart attack? Am I having, do I have a brain tumor? I mean, all these thoughts like come to your head. And
Of
because
course.
you're having all sorts of symptoms. I mean, for me, my symptoms ranged from like dizziness to, numbness in my arms. Like my hands would get numb as I was driving. Like I couldn't feel the steering wheel, you know what I mean? Because my hands, I had to literally stop because my hands would be like numb. It was very scary and happening on a daily basis. And then even like, I'm prone to migraines too. And so it would trigger a migraine, also just from everything, from all the stress, from all the pressure, you know what I mean? So it was scary. And if somebody
Yeah.
doesn't understand the dynamic of how that works, it can easily turn into something far worse, you know what I mean? And then they're rushing to the hospital because they don't know what's happening to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's either from the perception of something more serious, or potentially over time, something more serious actually happening if you don't resolve the anxiety aspect and the panic aspect of what's going on. And then that, not to mention as well, the functional impact, right? You're in school, you're trying to learn, move forward in your life and prepare for the next stage of your life. And so it's so difficult to carry the burden of anxiety through all of that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, if I could ask then, what you mentioned what prompted you to shift? How did you begin to make the shift away from that panic situation where you had this daily issue to then moving ahead and moving through it and out of it?
Yeah, so for me, it was really learning about anxiety. I had to learn what anxiety was. I had to learn about the anatomy of a panic attack. How does a panic attack start? What causes it to get to that point? What kind of thought processes were leading to that? Because I had some terrible thought processes. Like the way that my brain would process information it was very unhealthy, and it was something that needed to be addressed in order for me to make a change. So I needed to think, okay, as soon as this thought pops into my head, like how can I switch it? How can I change it as it pops into my head? And so for me, a lot of that anxiety was health based. So it was centered around like how I felt physically, because that's what initially started the whole thing, was because I was stressed out about everything that was going on. But then on top of it, I was starting to get a flu at the time, I remember. And then I started to get afraid of the actual flu and what that could mean, because it was around the same time that bird flu was like this big thing. So I was afraid of that illness. I was afraid of that disease. And then that just kind of spiraled, right? And then I started to be afraid of the symptoms. So to answer your question, I mean, really it was understanding why I was having the anxiety, what causes it, so that I wouldn't be afraid of it anymore, because I wasn't afraid of anything else at that time. It was just the anxiety and the panic. And so, learning about how a panic attack starts, what makes it get to that peak level, how does it subside afterwards, like literally to the T. I had to like
Oh,
learn all that stuff.
okay.
So
So
yeah.
if I understand properly, then just by learning in detail if you will, the anatomy of an anxiety response, the anatomy of a panic attack, and all the different stages of the kind of the premonition, the aura feeling, the actual response, and then the aftermath, and then the exhaustion that happens afterwards. So just understanding how all that works was enough to begin a shift for you.
Absolutely. And I was actually, at the time, I was reading a really good book. It was called Hope and Help for Your Nerves by Claire Weeks. I'm sure
Okay.
anyone who's had anxiety at some point has heard of it, or somebody has suggested it to them. It's a really good book. And there was a passage in there that I'll never forget. It said that the turning point for her was to accept and let go. And I remember that I loved that saying, and I remember having it posted in my car. It said, accept and let go. And for me, I remember one time I was driving to school, and it was about the same time that I was going to stop the car because I had the panic attack. And instead of stopping the car, I decided to just keep going. I just kept driving. I decided to let the panic attack come over me, right? And then I would just keep driving, and it was such a pivotal moment in my life in regards to anxiety, because after that, I no longer got panic attacks as I drove. I used to still get panic attacks once in a while, but as soon as I realized that I had control over how I was going to respond to it, and in this case, I just kept driving. I just kept driving, and I just kept remembering, accept and let go, let it happen, and just keep driving through it. Yes, it was scary. Yes, my hands got numb. Yes, I felt like I couldn't see clearly, which is probably not the safest thing to do, is keep driving, but it wasn't bad enough. But I don't, and this is for anybody listening, if you feel like you can't see, because sometimes that happens, right? Our anxiety plays like tricks with our eyes.
Right.
If that happens, pull over the car, right? But in my case, like, I kept driving through it. I was, there wasn't that busy on the street, and I just kept driving through it. I'm telling you, after I did that, it was such a turning point. And I never had a panic attack as I was driving after that. And if I did, maybe like one or two, it never got to that like peak level, because I wasn't afraid of it. I was like, you know what, bring it on. Let's give me all you got. So.
Nice. Wow. So just that shift in itself. So first understanding what it was, so when you felt it coming on, you could meet it head on like this, right? And then to stay in, rather than if you will, rather than manage the attack itself by suddenly pulling over, and just the shifting that and switching it to straight ahead like that. That's a nice technique there. Very good.
Yeah, well, I mean, and obviously there are other techniques that people can use. I'm not saying just, drive through it. I mean, there's other things, like I would distract myself as I was driving. I would try to I would put in my head, like, notice all the red cars that are on the road, and I would focus my attention on that. But, it's whatever works for everyone else. For me, it was really understanding anxiety, and that it wasn't going to kill me. It wasn't going to harm me. And, just working through those feelings and allowing them to happen. So that's
Right.
what worked for me.
But then what's so impressive is the result, right? So it wasn't like you just kept having more panic attacks and then just learned how to power through them. It's as if they actually subsided. Once you decided to lean, if you will, lean in and say, okay, I understand I'm going to have this, but I'm just going to keep going and get done when I need to get done. And that shift in your mind was enough to also cause a shift in your body. That's super profound.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And anybody who's listening, like, my biggest advice is, if you're feeling, the panic attack come over you, just let it happen. You know what I mean? I know it feels terrible. I'll be the first person. It's a terrible feeling, especially when you're in a social situation, especially if you're driving. It's a terrible feeling. But until you're able to really feel it, right? Feel every bit of it and not be afraid of it, it's going to be harder to heal. And I feel like that's the first step to healing, is to accept and let go.
100%. Yeah. And like you said, it's super uncomfortable, but then once you go through it, right, and then you realize that the attack in and of itself is nothing, right? And actually, normally the trigger point for the attack is also nothing. You put those two things together, and suddenly you're free of it. Wow.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
How long did this process take, if I could ask? How many times did you have to go through this exercise and suffer the panic attack and let go of it before suddenly they were no longer an issue for you?
Yeah. So driving, that was the last time that I had a panic attack while I was driving, in that time frame. And now I did have like maybe one or two a few years later for other related reasons, just from being overwhelmed. But I was able to, keep driving through them and just let them happen. Again, it wasn't comfortable, but I did it. But I would say that, from that time, maybe like three or 4 months was when I started to see a shift in how I felt, because my body was so overstimulated from the anxiety. And
Right.
so I needed to, it's because it's not an overnight process, right? If you've been suffering with anxiety for a very long time, if you're having daily panic attacks, you're not going to expect to get better, overnight, even if you're taking medication, even if you're, whatever you're doing, because your body is so overstimulated. And so until you are able to calm your nerves down, your body will still keep producing those symptoms. And so for me, it was, calming myself down, doing daily breathing exercises, taking 5-minute breaks, doing breathing exercises, centering myself, practicing mindfulness, changing up my diet. I mean, it wasn't just like, I mean, it was a process, right? And within those 3 months, I started to finally get some relief. I was finally able to go back to the mall. I mean, because there was a time where I think it had spiraled into agoraphobia, from what I'm hearing now is what it's called, where I didn't even want to go to the mall. I didn't want to go to like the store, because when I would go into the store, like even the lights would set me off a little bit, and it would cause a panic attack, because, you know, the lights, the fluorescent lighting and all this other stuff. I mean, it was like I had like vision stuff with it, like vision issues with my anxiety. Everyone has like something different with it. But for me, it was like all related to like my head, like dizziness and you know, visions, like distortness and stuff like that. Distortions, I should say. So for me, like certain things would set it off. And so I avoided going to malls. I avoided going to, you know, grocery stores and that sort of thing. But I think that after that, I kind of learned to do that a little bit more. So.
Excellent. Using the same techniques, and like you said, these careful preparations, your diet, the mindfulness, the breathing exercises. Almost everybody I talked with about this subject recommends breathing as a primary means of creating self-calm and creating particularly a lasting sense of self-calm. So that's
Yeah.
totally, and glad you agree with that as well. How did your life shift once you overcame this, and what are you doing these days?
Yeah, so my life completely shifted. I mean, obviously, I graduated college. I mean, this was years ago. Got married. I have two kids. You know, I have a business now that I run full time. And you know, as an entrepreneur, you know, and this is another thing I want to talk to with your audience and share with your audience. I'm sure a lot of them are entrepreneurs themselves. You know, you're gonna like the day to day stuff is gonna stress. You know, you're gonna have stress as an entrepreneur. It's unavoidable, basically. In any job. I mean, even if you're working corporate. I worked in corporate for 7 years, and you know, I've had all of those stressful days, and just, you know, so for me, like, I have to like constantly just take those breaks every single day, like the 15-minute breaks, go outside, go running, you know. I had to change my diet. But to answer your question, yeah, so I'm a full-time entrepreneur. I have a digital marketing agency that I run full-time, and then I also do I do coaching on the side as well. So I'm kind of doing it all right now, and then trying to keep our head above water, and with the
Exactly.
learning
Yeah.
with my 5-year-old. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot to balance, but I'm
Yeah.
particularly a big fan of the entrepreneurial path, especially these days, right? Because it provides a certain bit of flexibility, which actually helps to prevent anxiety to some extent, right? Whereas otherwise, if you're in a corporate environment, you're tied, you're joined at the hip with the direction they're headed, which is also, it provides a certain amount of stability and security as well. But the entrepreneur's methodology, and especially with the ability of your agency to shift back and forth, I'm sure provides a certain measure of freedom.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a really great journey. I mean, I've been really lucky and blessed. I started in 2017, towards like the end of 2017, and I left my full-time job in the beginning of 2019. So it's been almost 2 years now, as like doing this full time. And honestly, best decision I've ever made, because it was the right decision for me with my family, to take care of my kids and to have that flexibility and that freedom. And I get to do what I love every day. And to me, that was, you know, super important. So.
Totally awesome, right? Yeah, that's the most important part, where you get to focus on exactly what you wish to do, rather than just having a part of your job life being what you wish to do. So that's great. And if I could ask, who is your perfect coaching client? Who might reach out to you if they wish to access your coaching offer?
Yeah. So anyone who wants to, so the coaching that I do is around blogging and social media. So anybody who needs help with starting a blog, I actually have a course that's coming out on how to start a blog, start to finish. And I'm also working on another course for SEO and, you know, monetizing a blog. So anybody who wants to, this is perfect for anybody who wants to become an entrepreneur but doesn't know where to start. I always say start with either a blog or some type of platform where you can share your passions with the world, because you never know where it's going to take you. You never know what kind of skills you're going to get from it. And so I'm a big advocate for that. And so my biggest passion is to help other women, other men who, like I said, want to start a blog or want some type of platform online where they can, you know, do something, right? Share their passions and their talents and find what their passion and talents are. And so that's what I love to do. That's what I love to do on a daily basis. So
That's awesome. And what an easy, I would say easy, but what a straightforward way that where individuals can directly access the marketplace, the broader marketplace, through these tools and through what they would learn through courses and coaching. That's totally awesome. So I did want
yeah,
to put up some information for folks that might wish to reach out to you for further support. So we have your Instagram handle at ANA. I'm just going to spell it out right.
sure.
ANACANON inspires. So that's Anna Cannon Inspires. And then your company name, right, which is Avrah, Avrah,
Mhm.
virtual.com.
Yeah, and if
Sounds
I
good.
might say, yeah, if I might just add in there that if there are any entrepreneurs that are watching that need some help with social media management or with content creation for their business, they need somebody to write for them for their blog. We do all of that stuff. It's a one-stop shop. So if anybody is interested, let's book a call and chat about it.
Sounds good. I know I personally will definitely keep that in mind. That's
Awesome.
awesome. So, Anna, really thank you again for joining us and for sharing a very personal story and a lot of super successful tips for folks that are looking for solutions for anxiety. So, thanks again for joining us.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks again.
And for the Center of Calmness, I'm DK Winter.